I'd like to welcome everyone today. Lee Winterholder he is on jury duty, so his wonderful December happy holidays to
Mhm.
him. He gets to sit and see if he is available to do his civic duty for the community. With us today, we have Sophia, obviously, that we know, who keeps holding down the fort and things moving slowly. We have Jeff Colchin. Phyllis had surgery and she is not joining us today. Neither is Mary, but we do have Martha Waller from PIRE. She's going to be joining us as our special guest, and we're going to be really looking at the fourth grade survey, some changes to the pays coming up, and that's what our focus is going to be today. And we really do want some interaction between everyone in this room. The amount of knowledge and expertise from all of the agencies, community services, school districts that are here, we want to have some discussion. So we're hoping at the end of Martha's presentation, we will have some time to really dig into what are your questions? What are you seeing? What would you like to see? Because we want that to really feed into where we're moving and what we're doing to move ahead with the pays. Um, all of you probably know we've been working on a fourth grade. We did a pilot. We did actually two pilots prior to gauge what we wanted to see. What questions, what are actionable items? What can we do to look at fourth graders for early prevention? And what are we seeing with the population of the younger students? It was a lot of social and emotional learning, and we finally determined, PCCD supported, that we needed to actually put out a contract to find some really people who are very invested into this survey design and are able to support what we're trying to do with the fourth grade program. So from that process, PIRE was hired as a survey design consultant, and they have been working tirelessly and done great things to get us moving and looking very, very specifically at fourth grade and the changes to 25 and 27. So with wonderful excitement, I'm going to hand this off to Martha Waller, who is, as you can see, with PIRE and the lead on this project team. Oh, look at that.
Well, thanks, Alise. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited to talk to you guys today about the fourth grade pays. And we'll get a little bit into the 6th through 12th grade as well at the very end, but just a little bit. I think we have a poll question right at the beginning. Oh, nope. First one is the topics. So just today, what we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the fourth grade pays. I'm going to cover sort of how we went about making revisions, and specifically a content review, cognitive testing, and then pilot testing of that. And then we'll talk, like I said, briefly about 6th through 12th grade pays. Okay, so here's our poll question for folks. How familiar are you with the fourth grade pays? And so it runs the gamut of, I've never heard about it, this is the first time I'm hearing about it, to we've already implemented it at our school.
I have that up and I'll give you guys a couple minutes. About 20 seconds.
All right. So it looks like most of you have definitely known about it and you're interested in learning more. And then we have some folks that are new to it and our first time hearing about it, and then again a few that have already been implementing it and know all about it. So that's exciting. Great. All right, so we'll just get started then. We'll dive right into the fourth grade PAYS and we'll do a little bit of a review for folks. So next slide, please. All right. So, and I will just start off, I am not the expert on the history of the fourth grade PAYS or the PAYS in general, because again, we've just come into this work. But I wanted, I can fill you in on the basics. And if you need more details, I know Alise and Jeff can give you far greater details than I can. So the fourth grade PAYS, as Alise alluded to before, was implemented in 2021 and then again in 2023. Those were pilot tests for that. And really the intent of the fourth grade PAYS is to really focus mostly on strength-based measures, such as resiliency. And ideally, we would be measuring these indicators of strength and resiliency and social emotional learning and all of that prior to initiating substance use or other high-risk behaviors. That's not going to be the case across the board, but hopefully we're getting them before they're getting too involved in any high-risk behavior. And we really wanted to understand the needs among fourth graders that can inform the prevention efforts by schools, by organizations, community organizations that were going to address students' needs as well as parents and family needs, among probably other things as well. And then we wanted to look at constructs such as parental support and monitoring of their student, the student's commitment to learning, school climate and safety, teacher supports in schools, and their attachment to school, their friendships, the involvement in extracurricular activities that may be protective, as well as their screen time. So those were some of the broad constructs that we were looking at. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we started out as probably any of us would. We wanted to just look at what existed both in 2021 and in 2023. And our goals really were to reduce the burden on students in completing the measures, as well as increasing the validity and reliability of the measures. So we wanted to improve the comprehension and understanding of the measures. And we really wanted to reduce the total number of items to only the most essential questions. And then finally, we wanted to think in all of this, we wanted to think about how the data are used and how we can make them more useful to those who are using the data. And so that can be everything from school principals and teachers all the way up to superintendents, to other researchers, again, to organizations, community organizations, and even at the state level. So thinking about who's using the data, as well as how the data are used. So in the spring and summer of 2024, the PAYS internal work group and our contractors, both Penn State, Bach Harrison, and ourselves, we really started meeting regularly and really looking at the 2021 survey as well as the 2023 survey. And you can look up top, there were 88 questions in the first survey and 69 questions in the second. So it was reduced, but it's still a pretty big burden for 9, 10-year-olds. So we wanted to just look at what's there, and was there anything that jumped out at us as really maybe that's not appropriate for a fourth grader, and maybe this is too complicated, or maybe this is not a topic that resonates as well with who's using the data. So we had a lot of just discussion about that, and again clarifying what were the goals, what were our objectives in doing this, going through this process. And then we also ran statistical analyses. So we looked at, what were the response distributions? How did students vary in how they responded to questions? If everybody's only answering 1 or 2 of the responses, and there's four responses that they could possibly get, respond to. So for example, it's, always to never, and then there's a sometimes and often in there as well. And everybody's, responding to one end. So they always agree, or they often agree and nobody's doing the other, does that really tell us much? Does that give us a lot of information? So we looked at the distributions of responses. We looked at how correlated different measures were. So we wanted to look at that, particularly ones that should be correlated. Do they actually, are they actually related? And then we did something called a principal components analysis. And this is really an analysis to look at how items on the survey grouped together to measure a particular construct. So for example, we talked about parental support. There may be 10 questions around parental support. Do they all seem to measure the same parental support construct, or are there some measures that really group together really well and then others that just don't? And so looking at that, we can say, maybe these 4 questions out of the 10 are ones that we should keep because they really seem to capture what we mean by parental support. And these other questions, while important, maybe are less important, and maybe they're not, but we had to have that discussion. And so this new draft that we're looking at for 2025 we've reduced it to 42 questions, and that may change 1 or 2 after we do a final, get the final feedback. So we may end up down to 40 questions. It's possible it could go up to 43, but we will be in the, low 40s for sure. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so the first thing we did after having this big discussion and just giving it our best guess of this is what we think we should, I shouldn't say guess because obviously we're not guessing, we went through that whole process, but we decided this is what we think are the best questions to include. We then decided we need to focus group these or cognitively test them. So we wanted to go to the 4th grade students and say, how is this question? What do you think of when you think of this question? Is this, a question you understand? Do you understand the words? Are you thinking it's asking something different than what we think it's supposed to ask? So we looked at, we interviewed 3 groups of students from across the state. We started in Pittsburgh, ended in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and we talked to 3 to 4 students in each group. And then we asked them to examine each item, read each one, read the response category. We wanted to just make sure that they understood what the question was asking. And then the students through this just gave incredible feedback. They talked about which words maybe were unclear or, is that too abstract? So based on the feedback that they gave us about, just about every single question, we then went back and we made revisions to it. So let's next slide, please. And then once we made revisions again, based on the cognitive testing, we went back and we pilot tested in 6 classrooms. We were in 4 schools, again, trying to get some diverse populations or in school districts across the state. And in this case, we read the survey to the students, and that's because in 2025, that's how students will complete the survey. They'll have their headphones on and they will be able to hear the questions read to them as well as the response categories. So we did that for them. And then we analyzed the data and we've made some additional revisions. And again, those are not completely final, but there are 2 additional questions that we will probably drop. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, so here are some interesting findings, and this may be too small for some of you, so I will read it. There's a lot here. We had amazing feedback from the students, and students were very vocal and eager to provide feedback. So that was really exciting. And before what I should have done right from the beginning is to thank the teachers and the principals and the administrators and everybody who helped make this happen and volunteer their students in their classrooms, which was just wonderful, as well as the parents who allowed their students to participate. So this couldn't have been done without that. So some of the findings, just to give you a sense of what we were hearing, and this was not all of them, and these may really resonate with you because you probably know these students and what 4th graders are like better than some of us, but We found that fourth graders tend to still be very concrete and literal thinkers. So if there were vague wording if there was vague wording in a question, such as there was a question about, do you have at least one friend? Well, at least one, let me think about that. What does that mean? Can we make that more concrete? As opposed to at least one friend. They really overthought it, I guess, a little bit. So we tried to make things as specific as possible, as concrete as possible. And then the vocabulary also was really important, and we wanted to keep vocabulary as simplistic as possible, because we also know that there's a wide range of abilities among fourth graders, among anybody. And so we wanted, again, to make sure that words were not too sophisticated, I guess, for lack of a better word on my part, for some students. And so one example is we would ask questions about, on an average school day. Some kids would interpret that the way we might as adults, to say, oh, a typical school day. Well, so at a typical school day, this is what it looks like, or this is a normal school day. Well, others were interpreting that as, so an average school day, an average is a mean. So therefore, what would an average school day, and so they're going in a totally different direction. And then some weren't sure, again, is a school day just at school, or does a school day encompass before school and after school? And so again, there was some, almost an overthinking. Now, I'll also acknowledge that when we were doing the cognitive testing, we were asking the students to overthink. I mean, we were really prying and pulling information out of them with our questions. We were probing all sorts of things, and so they were overthinking about some of that. Another example of this is the word resolve, as in teachers help us resolve conflicts at school. Resolve was, again, a fairly sophisticated word, and so they gave us some other wording to use. There was a statement of, I hate school. And the fourth graders were really like, well, we're not allowed to use the word hate. Hate's not a good word. It's too strong. So we have things, I don't like school. Okay, that's a little different. We had some questions, and we added some questions specifically to get information around use of smart devices, length of time that's online, involvement with social media apps, that sort of thing. And so one of our questions was, do you own a smartphone, or do you use a smartphone? And what was fascinating is fourth graders didn't know what a smartphone was. Most of them knew a phone as a smartphone. It was the same thing to them. And so again, we had to reword that. Students tended to indicate that they rarely or ever argued with their parents or caregivers about screen time. Again, this blew all of our minds, because with our children, we all felt like we argued with them all the time about getting off screens. And yet the students were saying, no, we don't argue about that. So that was a really interesting finding, I think, that surprised all of us. But as a result, that's one of the questions that we were going to remove, because we just weren't getting any variation in responses. This one also really surprised us, and that is that fourth graders, both in the cognitive testing as well as in the pilot testing, really had the most difficulty with the race ethnicity question. And we're still struggling with how to, modify this to keep it in, because we feel like it's a really important question to keep in, but the students really indicated they didn't know what that meant. And part of the challenges where we say, select all that apply. So we give them an option to select all that apply, which is appropriate, right? But then they start thinking, well, am I this too, or am I that too? Or, how does that all fit together? And so again, that was a really challenging question. And the way we revised it after the cognitive testing is we put an option into the response categories of, I don't know what this question is asking. And by far, most students said, I don't know what this question is asking. So we're still wrestling with that a little bit. And if you all have feedback, we would love to hear it. And then in the instructions piece, and we've really found this in the pilot testing, the students were not always clear about what confidential or anonymous meant. And so they didn't really understand why the data were collected. They were very concerned about whether they could be identified. And so that was something that we really thought with the introduction, we needed to do a better job of making that accessible to fourth graders. So next slide, please. Okay, so another poll question. From your perspective, what do you see as the biggest challenge or barrier to collecting data from fourth graders? And actually, this is not a poll, so let's put this in the chat if people don't mind, if you have thoughts about this. Looks very quiet. There we go.
Yeah, the poor readers.
Yeah.
Now, and Martha, correct me if I'm wrong, these are read to the students.
Right. These are read to the students.
So the
Yeah.
fourth grade survey, which is a big piece of this, the fourth grade surveys are read by the teacher, the proctor, the identified survey coordinator. They are the person who reads them. So they're read out loud, and then the students are answering them online. So they can visually see them. They're also hearing them. So we have gauged for comprehension and reading level. Readability is definitely, we're at third grade level. Right? Is that right? Like 3 point something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's around there. So that is definitely a concern that we know, and we hope with it being read aloud to them that it's that we can alleviate a lot of those issues.
Right.
Parent permission. Debbie, you had talked about parental permission. The fourth grade survey has been provided with the same consent as the traditional pays. So what has happened is passive consent. So parents are notified that their fourth grader is taking the survey, the school is participating in the survey, probably some information as to why, information as to website, and to be able to access the questions. And then if they do not want their child to take the survey, they then have to say no. So you consent so it's passive consent, which means everybody's taking it unless you actively say, no, I do not want my child to take the survey. And that's absolutely open-ended. And the school can decide to have active consent if they desire, but a lot of the times it just takes a lot more effort on the school district's part and the survey coordinator. So I think, and Jeff could probably talk about that, but I think 97% of the school districts are passive consent. There are a few that do active consent, and their rates of surveys are lower, in general, just because it's difficult to get that consent back. So it's definitely something that we are aware of and that we pay attention.
Yeah, thanks, Elise. I think you hit it right in the head. The default is passive consent, and the majority of schools do take that approach. They send notification home, and the initial packet that goes from the parents, informing them that the survey will be provided, and instruction on how to opt the student out if they so choose. That's the approach that we'll be looking for the fourth grade as well. Again, these are not nearly as sensitive questions as we've heard some concerns with the 6 through 12 version. And there's a lot of value to improving the supports and curriculum provided to kids in those elementary years. And we think this will be very beneficial, and parents hopefully will see that.
I think Wendy also mentioned, does the reading of the question interfere with different types of learners, so visual and auditory? How often do students need the questions repeated and or explained, and is this done? So I can speak to our pilot testing, which is that if a student said, could you repeat the question, we absolutely repeated the question. And we also gave them time to respond. So it wasn't like we raced through it or anything. And I don't know for the official administering of it. I would think that if a student needed something repeated, that would be possible and probably should be done. And they will have, of course, the survey in front of them and be marking on the survey or on the computer. Hopefully, that will eliminate some of those challenges, but that's a really good question as well. So it looks like you guys hit all the things we were thinking about, which was comprehension and wording, and could we make this, understandable in a way that, are using words that were understandable and concrete for fourth graders. And I saw someone mentioned about the race thing, and the race question is based on the new requirements from department. Wait, I should know this, Jeff. It's it's the federal state. It's the federal measures of race
Correct.
ethnicity, and so it's combined like with ethnicity. So like Hispanic, Latino is included in the race question. There's several different versions of it, and we chose the simplest one. And then we added that question of, or that response of, I'm not sure what this is asking. And I guess it just surprised all of us that it didn't seem to matter what race or ethnicity the student was. They had challenges with that. Someone else put about the language barrier, and that is an excellent point, and it won't be addressed in the 2025, but I do think that if we're seeing that, and if you all are seeing that's something to bring to either to this meeting actually, and say, our students are really struggling with the language, English as a second language, and understanding what the questions mean because of that. So I think those are all very good points. All right, thank you. Okay, so just briefly, the 6th through 12th grade PAYS revisions, and we're just getting started on those. So let's, next slide. So again, the similar objective, we're trying to reduce the burden on the students. It's a long survey. And so we really do want to decrease the burden, and we want to make sure that we're asking the questions in such a way that they are valid questions and they're reliable from year to year to year. We're getting the same types of responses, and we're not seeing wildly different results from year to year to year, unless there's, some external reason for that. So we want to improve the comprehension and understanding. We want to reduce the number of items. And so again, this fall, we've already started working to look at the questions just sort of from a face validity standpoint, as well as conducting analyses. And again, to see how these different constructs fall, or different items fall together to measure different constructs. We want to add questions to this around screen time and social media use, and we will likely use the same questions that we used in the 4th grade survey. They're not that many, but we do want to get a sense of, how much are they using social media, how much time are they on screen, gaming, that sort of thing. And then we also are adding questions around sexual orientation and gender identity. These questions will be opt-in questions by the school, so it will not be a generic question on all the PAYS forms. As with anything, again, as we're talking about reducing items, we really need if we're adding items, it's even more important to reduce the number of items. For 2025, we're not going to make a huge change. There's just not enough time to make major changes. But after the 2025, there will be a lot more effort or a lot more discussion of, thinking about what questions are perhaps no longer relevant. What questions do we feel are not used particularly by schools or not informative to schools or other users of the data? So we really want to look at that as well. But that's a much larger process. I also, as you can imagine, 6th graders are going to be at a very different developmental level than 12th graders. And so some questions may not really be appropriate to ask of 6th graders. And so again, looking at what's appropriate for each of the grades will also be part of those discussions. Let's do the next slide. And I see a question in the comments, and I will.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I think Jeff probably, while you're looking at the poll that's up there, Jeff probably, we did add gambling questions. Do you remember, Jeff, when they were added? It's been recently.
No, gambling was added back in, I believe, 2013.
Okay.
At the behest of DDAP, when they started having the gambling funds be released to the counties.
And that I would just throw this out there, is with the online gambling and the sports betting that has become so prolific, and is actually, from my understanding, far more where folks are gambling at this point than, say, at casinos or something. Then there's a lot, looking at that specifically, as particularly among young people who are using social media so prolifically as well, then it probably pays to revisit those questions to the extent that they need revising. But yeah, those are good questions. All right, so this question, just in your opinion, what is the most important information collected in the 6th through 12th grade PAYS? And what data findings are most important to you in the work that you do? So I threw some content pieces in there. That doesn't mean that this is everything that the PAYS covers. But if you were to choose between these 6 options, is there one that you're most interested in personally? Or so I'm just curious about that.
And while you're answering that, there was a question, sorry, there's a Q&A. The increase in homeschooling and cyber-schooled students, are they included in the PAYS data? That, and again, I'll defer to Jeff a lot because I just did my first full administration of PAYS, but they are included dependent on the school and the systems that are involved. So there are some non-traditional schools that are qualified as cyber schools that, that they completed as their own entity, as their own school LEA. If your school district has students that are homeschooled or cyber schooled, it would have to be I think a very focused process to get them to be included. Is that correct, Jeff? They're not automatically.
Yeah, that's correct.
included.
It's up to the individual school district or school to decide that. It really would only be for online administration, where the students be able to provide it with the link. Obviously, the big concern we have is anonymity of student responses. If you're homeschooled and your mom or dad are standing behind you, that may affect the way that you answer a particular question. So we do leave it up to the individual schools to decide on how they want to approach those kids that are remote learning. But it is available through the online version.
A great question. Okay. So substance use and mental health measures are probably the most important, it looks like. So that's wonderful. Yeah, those all make perfect sense. And as you think about that, again, it's sort of, from a school perspective or from a preventionist perspective, or even from a medical, perspective, all of those are, incredibly important, important measures, as are all of these, to be perfectly honest, but I appreciate that feedback. I also want to just acknowledge that the questions that we've included in the polls that I created are not great questions. They would not pass the muster of this this review committee. So I just want to acknowledge not good questions. They were really just, encourage some discussion and thought about this and engagement. So if anybody's
and I
like,
think-
wow,
and
these
I-
are the types
yeah.
of questions.
No, but I think, Martha, too, that they are very important because the individuals that we have here are, consistently are involved, and it is very important because, as we saw, where their top two priorities are. And I think that is important to know that those are our biggest things that we're focusing on from this small group. There's also another, and I was going to respond to this in the Q&A. I was going to type my answer, but I will share it. A few families of younger students have expressed their concern about the age appropriateness of certain questions being asked, such as younger students being asked about cocaine, etc. Has this been a common concern, and how can we best address this concern? I will speak to that, and then I think Martha will probably be maybe looking at the 6th grade bridge. I answer all of the PACE questions currently that come in during the administration period. And I will tell you that, yes, we're very aware. It is a common concern. 6th grade is an area of development that is very in flux. You have very developed and mature students. You have very immature students who, don't have and don't need to have the exposure to certain things. So there are a lot of concerns with 6th grade parents saying, I don't want this to be asked of my child. And addressing that, we do have the research. We actually have the cited sources on our FAQ sheet that comes out every administration that talks about just mentioning it does not encourage use, it doesn't show that there is any correlation with the exposure of being asked the question to wanting to do it. In addition to that, we also built in skip logic. So if there is a question, have you, and I don't know the specific questions, but if they answer no to, have you used a certain substance? No, they don't get asked any of the follow-up questions related to that substance. So the survey is decreased significantly with those questions that are maybe sensitive to the 6th grade. The third thing I would say about this is that we're looking at in 2027, we're hoping that we can use the 4th grade survey and maybe create a 6th grade bridge version, for lack of a better term. Right now, that's what we're using to have those questions kind of make that bridge between the 4th graders and then the 8th to 12th grade survey. And what does that look like? And we don't know. I'm going to tell you, we don't know what that looks like, but we're very aware of that issue and the commonality that 6th grade is an issue that we hear a lot about, because we want to make sure that that people are very aware that we are aware, and that we don't think that this is it's not detrimental. There is not an impact, but we understand that a parent is going to still have concerns, or a caregiver. So those are the 3 things that I will say about the 6th graders being asked some sensitive questions, and cocaine and heroin and things that they haven't heard of and haven't been exposed to, because we also then have the 6th graders that have been exposed to and are very aware of it. So we're walking that line and figuring out what works best. And hopefully in 27, we have some additional information and research to be able to support a bridge that gives us the information that we want without these concerns of the questions.
Great summary, Alise. I think, anyone that's looked at the survey results can see these very low rates of response for some of the, lack of a better term, harder drugs. And I don't think that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at the main indicators of substance use that can lead to problem behaviors down the road by sixth graders. So we are looking to how do we adapt that as we move into 27. I am extremely grateful for PIRE and the research capability they're bringing to the table. So we're not doing willy nilly. We're going a well thought out, conscious as to the impact of changes we're making on historical trend data, but also recognizing if we're asking sixth graders about their 30-day use of heroin, we're not seeing a lot of kids that are engaging in that behavior. So is that something that we may want to phase out? Alise, I think, did a really good job talking about the bridge version. We don't want schools to say, well, we'll just do the fourth grade and not do the sixth grade. But are there ways we can make the sixth grade more amenable to addressing parental concerns? Everything about PAYS is informing schools and community partners as to how they can help support the kids that they serve. And that's really the focus we're taking as the leadership group.
I'm really appreciating these questions and the discussion. It always surprises me, and I've shared this with Alise and Jeff before, how engaged Pennsylvania folks are with the PAYS. It's just blows my mind, having worked with other states, that often it's pulling teeth to get schools interested in data collection and involved. And so I'm just always impressed with how engaged and how thoughtful everybody is. So all right, I think this last slide may be the closing up. Oh, so some of the next steps then. By February 1st, we will have the 2025 versions ready to go. We are going to have finalized the fourth grade survey items and the instructions. We will have finalized which questions are going to be removed from the 6th through 12th grade PAYS. And then we will begin the review process for any additional revisions for 2027, and specifically, as Alise and Jeff have already shared, that sixth grade bridge in particular, and start thinking about that specifically. So that's sort of where we are. And then I just want to leave the floor open for additional questions, comments, feedback, and just again to say thank you for all that you all are doing.
Okay, and then I'm going to add just a few things. So there's Martha's contact information. And honestly, I'm going to say the science part of this, it's definitely something that I know, for lack of a better term, it does go over my head a lot, but it's very, very interesting to be aware how grounded in science this survey is, and that really it doesn't, we don't change questions on a whim. We want to make sure that they are valid and that they are reliable and that they fit with other questions in the survey. And we're trying to make sure that we are actionable because, we obviously this is a very prolific survey and we want everybody to be able to utilize it in a way that serves them well, whatever their domain is that we're looking at. And, there's a lot of changes. A lot of people are looking at the survey a little more in depth because we want this information and we want to make sure that whatever information we're providing is very scientifically sound and backed by the support of science. So I'm going to answer, there's a couple questions in the Q&A. Sophia did put the FAQ in the chat. So you can find the research there that we cite, that exposure to asking the question does not make students use or, be any more curious about that information. And then also, is there a concern that some students may not have heard of substances suggested in the wording, this being their first exposure to the drug in language terms? I'm not sure how to answer that other than what I have said, because I'm not, if they like heroin, if we're very clear in hoping our wording is very clear that says, if you don't understand the question or understand the words, don't answer it. You don't have to answer every question. You can just skip it. And you are absolutely encouraged to skip any questions that you don't understand or that you don't know what they are saying. Does that happen probably every time with 100% certainty? No, but we really do encourage students to, if you don't understand it, don't answer it. We also have a proctor video, so every student will see the same video that says, here's why we're asking these questions. Here's what we need. Here's why we're asking. Here's what we're asking. And it dives into, we don't have the ability to track any of this information. And that's interesting recently for students since COVID, since they have their personal devices. Oh, you can track an IP address. You know who's answering this. We do not. And we make that very clear to the students and to the teachers, because, there are parents and teachers who are saying, you should be able to track this. Can't you find out which? No, we cannot. And I have some wording that is very technologically advanced to let everybody know that it isn't possible for us to be able to track specific answers to specific students. And it's important for everybody to get that same message. So again, that circled way more than you needed to know about the substances and the wording. But in reality, that's what they're asked. If you don't know the answer to this, don't answer it. Just skip it. And hopefully that answers that question for you. And Sophia did put the resources and the proctor video there. There will be a new proctor video coming out. We're actually in negotiations right now to talk with a little more. We want it to be a very green survey that everybody can watch this proctor video before they take the survey, and everybody receives the same message. So there will be a new one, but that's the outline. That basically is what we showed last year. So feel free to take a gander. I think it's 4 minutes long, 4 minutes, a little over 4 minutes. And it actually walks through with actual students saying, why am I taking this survey? And I think that it serves good purpose to give students the information and anybody else who is involved with the PACE. It just lets us know why you're taking it and what is done with the information. And we're hoping to have one much shorter one for the 4th grade also. But we don't have the blueprint for that. That's in its infancy stages for sure, because it was just brought up, I think, 2 weeks ago. So we're hoping that we can get that involved also. Any other questions? Anything that any of you here at the webinar found interesting, are concerned about, feel like you don't have information, feel like you'd like more information? We really value the webinar participants, and every month there's 50 to 75 people consistently showing up, and we want to make sure that we continue to be valuable in what you need and what resources we can provide for you. That being said, our next webinar is in February. We will not meet in January. Everybody can have a happy holidays, happy new year, and we will not be meeting in January. In February, we will be talking about developing some community resources using the PACE data. Probably have some featured speakers that communities that have used certain resources using the PACE data. What have you used? What do you want to use? What information do you need? What can we share? So if you have something that you would like to share, you don't have to present, but if you have something that you can share with me, we can even highlight it, make sure that it's available. If you have a one-pager, if you have a infographic, if you have a small video that you've done, please share, and we will make sure that this group gets that information. And I think that's probably the strongest thing that we have are the connections in using the data and figuring out the best way to utilize the data. And I think that's probably all I have to say. It doesn't look like we have any more questions. Thank you all for spending your first Wednesday at 1 o'clock with us for December. And I hope everybody has a happy holiday season. And please take the survey so we can have information